Formally open the meeting, so I'll now request the live streaming of this meeting commence. So I'll just confirm with our officers and audio staff that the live streaming has commenced. If you can let me know, please, once it is. Thank you. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and our viewers watching the live stream of tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Trent McCarthy. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Darebin City Council. I'll be the chairperson of tonight's Planning Committee meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's meeting, and I declare the meeting open at 6:33 p.m. So welcome. Darebin City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters we now call Darebin, and pays respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Council pays respect to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Darebin. Council recognises and pays tribute to the diverse culture, resilience and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the right to self-determination in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect. The health, safety and well-being of the community has and will always be the paramount consideration of the Council. Council continues to be guided by the government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing for the health of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. This meeting will be open to the public in line with current health restrictions. This meeting is also being live streamed via a link on the Council website, so the public will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. This chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. Before we commence, I'd like to introduce the councillors in attendance tonight. Councillor Emily Dimitriadis, welcome back.
Thank you.
Councillor Gaetano Greco. Councillor Tom Hannon.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Councillor Tim Lawrence.
Good evening.
Councillor Suzanne Newton.
Good evening, Chair and everyone.
Councillor Susan Rennie.
Good evening.
And Councillor Julie Williams.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge, I'll do that in just a moment actually. I'd just like to introduce our officers in attendance tonight. To my left, Vanessa Petrie, the Acting General Manager of City Sustainability and Strategy. We also have Catherine Pound, Manager City Development. Chad Griffiths, Manager City Futures. Hamish Jacobson, Senior Strategic Planner, City Futures. Julie Smout, Coordinator Statutory Planning, and Dan Burke, Senior Town Planner. So let's get underway, everyone. And I'll also acknowledge that our Mayor, who would normally chair this meeting, Councillor Alina Messina, is an apology this evening and is on an approved leave of absence, and we wish her well. Councillors and officers, are there any interests or conflicts of interest to declare in relation to any of the items on this evening's agenda? Councillor Hannon?
Thank you. I need to declare a conflict on one item, which is 5.2, the planning permit application for Basing Street in Northcote. And then I live very nearby, so I will exit the room for that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hannon. Before that item, I'll ask you to again provide details of the type and nature of that conflict of interest. I'll then ask you to leave the chamber before this item is moved and return to the item once the item has been considered and voting on. Thank you. If we can just turn any mobile phones off, please, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, councillors, the item 4, the confirmation of minutes of the previous meetings. Could I please have a motion for the adoption of the meetings of the Planning Committee held on the 8th of August? Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Williams, and seconded by Councillor Rennie. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Okay, that's noted as unanimous. Thank you, councillors, and that motion is carried. Okay, that'll take us to item 5, councillors. Item 5, consideration of reports. Application for planning permit D617, 2001, 4 to 6 Cool Street Reservoir. So that's the item, councillors, that we'll be considering. Officers will present to the committee on a brief presentation of the item. So, officers, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. This application proposes the construction of 8 double-storey town dwellings on 3 consolidated lots. 6 dwellings.
Through you, could you speak up closer to the microphone, please? Yep, thank you.
The application proposes the construction of 8 double-storey dwellings on 3 consolidated lots. 6 dwellings contain 3 bedrooms and 2 dwellings contain 2 bedrooms. 11 objections were received against this application on the key grounds of neighbourhood character concerns, the scale of the proposal, car parking, and amenity impacts on the adjoining residential addresses. The proposal is largely compliant with elements of Clause 55, Res Code, of the Darebin Planning Scheme. The application is recommended for a notice of decision to grant a permit subject to conditions. Thank you.
That's all? Yep. Thank you very much. So, councillors, are there any questions of our officers in relation to this item? Councillor Greco. Yep.
Thank you, Acting Chair. I'd just like to ask a question in relation to the side and rear setbacks. I understand that it doesn't meet the standard, and if you could just speak to that and what's been done in terms of addressing that particular point.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. The proposal largely is compliant with side and rear setbacks, but upon assessing the overshadowing impacts to adjoining properties, it was found that 2 dwellings to the north of the site, 2 dwellings to the north of the site did create overshadowing to 2 dwellings at number 2 Cool Street, so units 1 and units 2 of 2 Cool Street. The applicant has modified the plans to increase the setbacks on that side so that there is no overshadowing to either of those dwellings.
Thank you, Dan. Any further questions, councillors, in relation to this item? No? Councillors, if there are none, then we'll move straight to hearing the submissions. So, councillors, we have 2 submitters this evening who wish to address the Planning Committee tonight. Each submitter will get 3 minutes, so I'll call first the applicant, Adrienne Callock. Do we have... Yep, thank you. If you can step up to the lectern. Thank you very much and welcome. So you'll have 3 minutes and you should be able to see the clock there, hopefully. That's fine, yeah.
Mr Chairman and councillors, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on the application this evening. My name's Adrienne Callock, I'm a town planning consultant and I'm assisting the permit applicant with the matter. As you would have read in the officer report, the site is very well located with respect to services and facilities. Not only do we have 2 local shopping strips, but 2 bus routes and a tram route all within 500 metres of the site, as well as a couple of primary schools. The site, as you've heard, is a large allotment, almost 1,500 square metres, and it has a good northern aspect. The site does not contain any significant vegetation, as has been confirmed by Council's arborist. In terms of the design response, as you would know, the Darebin Planning Scheme seeks to encourage housing diversity, affordability, and also encourage energy efficient design. The site is within an incremental change area, and what that seeks is a reasonable level of change and moderate development. The proposed townhouse style development, we say, is moderate level of change and represents incremental change, and we are providing diversity in terms of a range of 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings. From the street, the central driveway enables an efficient layout to be provided, and it also maximises landscaping space within the front setback. The 2 houses fronting the street with the central driveway maintain the streetscape rhythm of dwelling spacing, and the contemporary style with a mix of materials including brick, cement, sheet and render and timber look cladding will fit comfortably into the street, as will the pitched roof form, which is compatible with nearby housing. And the development has a modest overall maximum height of in the order of 7.5 metres as it presents to the street. From a neighbour's perspective, we have proposed minimal boundary wall construction, and it has been sensitively located either alongside neighbouring walls to the east or a driveway to the west. And what that means is that there is good space for landscaping along the majority of side and rear boundaries. The two-storey form, again, is compatible with the height of other nearby housing, including that to the north and the west. And the revised plans, as it's been indicated, have sought to ensure there is no increase in overshadowing of the two rear yards to the east. And there's also negligible overshadowing of the property to the west. Most walls are set back well in excess of the minimum requirements, as has been demonstrated in the council planning report. And upper floor windows have been screened where necessary to maintain privacy. With respect to internal amenity, the layout has capitalised on the northern aspect and is an energy efficient design. Each dwelling has got a well-proportioned area of ground level open space and sufficient parking. The car parking layout has been designed to ensure all vehicles can exit the site in a forward direction, and the provision of car parking satisfies the requirements of the planning scheme, not only for residents but for visitors. The traffic, we say, that will be generated by the development is minimal and reasonable.
Just get you to finish up there if you can.
Thank you.
Thanks.
In conclusion, there are a number of permit conditions that have been recommended by the planning officer, and the permit applicant accepts those conditions, including a waste management plan.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now invite one of the objectors, Lutini Duvius, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, to please come to the lectern, and there should be a microphone there for you. Thank you. And you also have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Look, I live at number 9, and I'm not objecting to any development occurring. It's just that 8, I believe, is way too many on 2 properties. I think there should be 6, just to allow for more car spaces, because I do know that if you build more than 5, you have to apply for parking on the street, which means there'll be parking on the street. Is that correct?
We can't provide responses this evening,
Oh,
but
okay.
if you'd like to just speak to your submission,
Okay.
and we can consider that. Thank
All
you.
right. My concern is more that the parking in the street, because where the 8 are being built, next door there's 3 still to be built that haven't been built yet, and I don't know if that's been taken into consideration. There's also 3 next to it being built, and there's 3 across the road. So altogether you've got 17 houses that are going to be built that are sort of in one section in only 6 plots. So my concern is traffic, parking, and also where are the bins going to go, and where are all these bins going to go for collection. And my mum also gets services from you guys, from the Darebin with the bus service, and my concern is the bus being able to go through the street with so many cars that will be parked out on the road. So that's my concern. My concern also is there's also a childcare being built on the corner of the street, which is Elizabeth and Cool, right on that corner. And that's not even open yet. Once that opens, there'll be so much traffic with all the parents picking up the kids, and the street will also become a little bit more dangerous. You know, there'll be kids around, and there's you're talking about a lot of traffic coming up and down our street. So they're my concerns. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming along this evening and sharing your concerns. Thank you. Thank you to both our objector and our applicant for your submissions this evening. So, councillors, do I have a motion? There's a recommendation there in front of you, councillors.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Newton, moving the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Newton. Do I have a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Hannan. Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Does the mover wish to speak?
Just briefly, yeah, absolutely hearing the concerns of the objector, but I think on balance, I do think this is a reasonable application for the site, and I don't see enough reason to knock back this one, so I think it's okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Hannan, do you wish to speak as the seconder?
Thank you. Just briefly to say I appreciate everyone who's come tonight, the objectors and applicant, and the huge amount of work that's been done on this application. I do understand that the sort of growing pressures of increasing numbers in this street and many other streets across Darebin. I think, but we have to. Our job is to, apply the rules as they are set both at a local and a state level. There's been a lot of analysis of this application, and it generally meets the rules. In some cases, with conditions that we've heard the applicant will accept. And I think that's probably going to get the best outcome in this case. We've seen in other cases where something that has been objectively shown to meet the rules and then rejected will invariably go to VCAT and probably get a worse outcome. So I think the conditions that have been applied will help to make this an appropriate development, and in that case I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Are there any other speakers for or against, councillors? Well, if there's no further speakers, councillors, I'll put the item to the debate. Those in favour? Okay, that's Councillor Hannan, Councillor Newton and myself. Those against? So Councillor Demetriadis, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Williams and Councillor Rennie. Okay, that motion is lost. Councillors, we need a decision in relation to this, so I'll ask to councillors have an alternative motion. Councillor Rennie.
Deputy Mayor, yes, I do have an alternate motion. I'll ask that that be put on the screen.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Rennie's put forward an alternative motion. Can I ask if there's a seconder? Councillor Greco. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie, can I ask you just to check that that motion as listed is the motion that you presented and put forward?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you so much. Okay, so councillors, hopefully you can all see that. I believe this has been circulated in advance. Councillor Rennie, I'll ask you to speak to your motion.
Thank you. And I thank the staff for working with me to identify these grounds of refusal, which are actually quite narrow. Generally, I think there's a lot to commend in this application, and I do believe that 8 dwellings on this site actually is appropriate. It's a very large site. We see 4 units on a site that's half this size frequently. 8 sounds like a lot, but in fact, the double nature of the site means that it's like 8 on 2 blocks. I also think that these are going to be valued homes for people who will move into them. They're a nice size. I like the fact that each dwelling is separate from the other, and so there's not a continuous block form for neighbouring people. The thing that concerned me when I looked at the plans was the ingress and egress. That is to say, the way in which cars will move in and out of the property, in particular the tight turning areas and lack of convenient manoeuvrability for vehicles in this space. And that leads also to what I think is a lack of inadequate pedestrian access to the site in the context of us trying to encourage people not to be so car dependent. I believe these issues could be resolved, and I hope that the developer will look at this because the grounds of refusal that I'm suggesting here tonight are quite narrow. So I do believe they can be resolved, and I invite my colleagues to contribute their thoughts as well.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie, as the mover of the motion. Councillor Greco, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Look, I support this alternate motion, which will reject the application, and I thank Councillor Rennie for putting this forward. I don't want to go over the points that Councillor Rennie spoke about in relation to the turning circles and things like that, and I think that's been well articulated. I suppose I come to this from an overall concern, is that it's been mentioned that it's a generous allotment of land, and what's been developed there is some new homes, which will be good to see. But when you look at the development, it does not actually meet all the standards, and I think that when you've got a generous amount of land like that, and you have a development of this nature, the developer should be able to tick off on all the standards. And in this case, all those standards have not been ticked off. And therefore, what that says to me is that too much has been tried to be put on that land in terms of being an overdevelopment. And as a result of that, I can't support this. I don't think we're far away from getting an ideal outcome. I think the residents of the area would accept that that some development would occur there, but it's got to be appropriate development. And I think that if the developers, together with the residents, were to sit down, I think a solution could be accommodated, and hopefully that can be achieved through the VCAT process.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Chair, Deputy Mayor McCarthy, thanks for that. Yes, look, I'm happy to support this technical alternate motion. I would say that this example of development, unfortunately, has become a feature in Reservoir and parts of Preston, where there's just an as-right attitude to 4 townhouses per block. The nightmare of that you can see further up above Rathcown Street if you go into some of the suburbs on the east side of the railway line. Serviceability, car parking, egress is just impossible for certain streets because the submissions of this council for residential protection on side streets was turned upside down by a departing planning minister. The fact is we have an inside-out approach to development in Preston and Reservoir too often. We have zoning on transport corridors which is not built on, and we are wrecking family homes and family suburbs with developments like this. It may seem like a large block to people in Fitzroy or Westgarth, but actually people have enjoyed a good lifestyle with one home on 800 square metres in Reservoir for 70 years, and it's quite reasonable when people put a submission here tonight that there should be 3 townhouses on this, not per block, and there's only 2 blocks here, not 3, and it should be a 6-unit development, not an 8-1. It's exactly the kind of proposal we've been fighting against in Best Street and in all parts of Reservoir. And again, if we paid more attention to setbacks at a policy level, we could repair some of the damage that was imposed on us by the Planning Minister, Matthew Guy.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillors wishing to speak to this item, either for or against? If there are none, then I'll put the motion to the vote. So it is an alternative motion, as you can see there on screen, councillors. Those in favour? Yep, so that's Councillor Demetriadis. Please keep your hand up, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Hannan, Councillor Newton, Councillor Rennie, Councillor Williams and myself, Councillor McCarthy. So that motion has been passed unanimously. So councillors and also those that have joined us in the gallery. So that motion is carried. That is a motion of refusal. So the Planning Committee has decided not to support the application and instead to issue a refusal to grant a planning permit on the grounds, and those are those listed. The applicant and objectors will be notified in writing. The applicant can appeal the decision at VCAT. The process of appeal is subject to timeframes detailed on the documentation. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, those of you that have joined us this evening. We'll now move on to our next item. So thank you very much for joining us. Councillors, the next item is item 5.2. Item 5.2 relates to planning permit application D850-2021-84-96 Bastings Street, Northcote. Councillor Hannan.
Yes, excuse me, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to declare a conflict on this item, please. By the fact that I live close nearby. So I'd like to excuse myself for that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan, and we'll return you once we've finished with the item. Thank you. Thank you. I'll now hand over to our officers to provide a brief presentation on the item.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. This application seeks to construct 49 dwellings on a lot and reduce car parking requirements. 73 objections were received, including 1 petition on the key grounds of neighbourhood character concerns, the scale of the proposal, potential contamination, car parking, and amenity impacts on the adjoining residential addresses. The proposal is largely compliant with most elements of Clause 55, Res Code, of the Darebin Planning Scheme. However, the sought car parking reduction is significant and amounts to 48 spaces. A revised officer recommendation is proposed in relation to Condition 3 of the permit to include a sub-condition regarding screening vegetation to the southern boundary fence. This condition was agreed to between the applicant and the Westgarth Primary School and was accidentally omitted from the recommendation. The revised officer recommendation is to include Condition 3S to Condition 3 to state additional screen planting along the southern boundary to the east and west of the existing trees located on the school site. Accordingly, it is recommended the Planning Committee forms a position to support planning application D850-2021 subject to conditions.
Great, thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions of our officers in relation to this item? Councillor Demetriadis, first cab off the rank. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I note a significant reduction in parking with this development. If traffic congestion was to become an issue when this development is occupied, how will Council reduce traffic congestion?
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Through you, Councillor McCarthy, I'd like to answer that. There's currently no traffic restrictions, parking restrictions on Bastings Street, and as with all areas of the municipality, that can be considered should there be any adverse traffic impacts in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, you've got a question?
For our occupant to expand their car parking space, what would be the process for the occupant to go through in receiving a permit for that?
So thank you, Councillor Williams. That can be assessed under secondary consent. So that's an application to amend the endorsed plans. What that would entail is that they submit amended plans that have the wall between the existing garage and the storeroom removed. As it's a secondary consent application, it wouldn't necessitate advertising, and it would just require assessment at an officer level. Thank you.
Thank you. You've got a further question, Councillor Williams?
For those walls to be moved, would any of them have any impact? Like, I can't just remove a wall at my place where it might be a substantial amount of leverage of what the building is obviously needing to have that wall there. Is there any of those in that situation?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. So we don't assess the engineering side of things in town planning, but the applicant has advised that they're not load-bearing walls and they should be free to be removed without any additional engineering work required.
Thank you. Councillors, any final questions before we move to submissions? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Chair. My question goes to the central issue of neighbourhood character. I just want to get an understanding how, through the assessment process, how it was that it was considered, given the nature of the area, which is a highly residential area, that it met the test of neighbourhood character.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. The site itself is something of an anomaly. It has contained a meatworks for quite some time. The site is heavily concreted and was covered with factories until recently. It still, as it stands, contains a impervious brick fence, which is almost 2 metres in height. So in that sense, it is truly an anomaly. The applicant has addressed neighbourhood character through materiality. They have addressed the prevailing vernacular by using red brick and adopting some of those styles that are prevalent, not just on Bastings Street, but to Newmarket Street to the southeast, which is a heritage area.
Thank you. Councillors, if there's no further questions, so Councillor Williams, got another question? Yep.
What protection will the applicant be putting through regarding the open space at the West Scarf Primary School for the children that are playing during recess and lunchtime?
So, thank you, Councillor Williams. The construction management plan has been conditioned. That's part of the recommendation. So that will contain a raft of conditions to ensure that the school, the neighbouring properties aren't adversely affected. The applicant has consulted with West Garth Primary School on a couple of occasions, and together they have agreed on some conditions. I believe there's also an agreement to ensure that the demolition and works are coordinated so that they don't directly conflict with school operating hours.
One more, and then Councillor Mitch. Yep, and then we might have to wrap the questions up, councillors, because you have had time before the meeting.
I believe we've missed 60 days, is that correct? How many days has it been that's passed?
I'll have to take that on notice. I can't answer. I can't give a specific answer to that. I'm sorry, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Councillor Dimitriadis.
Thank you. I just wanted some further clarifications from Councillor Williams's question. What exactly is the applicant going to do about the issue of privacy over to the school? Like, are they specifically in the contractual agreement that they have to be done?
So despite the fact that the school is located within a public use zone, and by virtue of that, it doesn't require, it's not subject to the same overlooking standards as a dwelling would be. They have practically applied those same standards to that school interface in any case. Part of the conditions, some of the conditions that were agreed to between the applicant and the school relate to a balustrade applied to one of the townhouses on their terrace. Another condition requires the applicant to demonstrate how the overlooking measures, such as the hit and miss brickwork and the vertical fins, actually work in terms of overlooking. They have to demonstrate that it meets the standard. The other condition is what I referred to earlier. The applicant has requested that screening vegetation is planted between the existing vegetation, which is located within the school. So there's some substantial gum trees right on the northern boundary of the school. So that condition will require that the remaining gaps are filled with screening vegetation.
Thank you. Councillors, I haven't seen any further questions, so I'm going to move to the presentations, submissions from our applicant and objector. So if I can invite to the podium Panos Miltiadou. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. There should be a microphone there. Just letting you know, you have 3 minutes, and you should be able to see hopefully the clock there as well. Thanks.
Good evening, councillors. Yeah, my name is Panos Miltiadou. I'm the director of Lucent Group, the developer behind the application at 84 to 96 Basing Street in Northcote. So leave it better than we found it is the core ethos of our business. So going straight to the obvious points, we are seeking a reduction in car parking. We're doing this purposefully. It's around sustainable traffic outcomes. It seeks to work with the future owners to understand their needs and encourage suitable modes of transport. We do this in line with Council's own climate emergency and sustainability transport units feedback. And importantly, a point that I'll labour is that we do work with our purchasers in relation to what they want. If they do want 2 car parks via secondary consent, we can work with them to give those extra car parks per dwelling. We have the ability to do this to 41 of the 49 townhomes. We don't want an internal roadway. We don't want to promote garages, bleak laneways with grey outcomes. We're trying to convert grey space into green space. The application has 2,142 square metres of garden area. It complies with height, it complies with setback, it complies with overshadowing, it complies with overlooking, all based on the planning policy. It's designed to capture northern light to all homes, to private open space, crossflow ventilation from north to south, and in some cases east to west. It is a 7.5-star NATA's weighted average, something that's very important in the context of thermal efficiencies. It's fossil fuel free, like all of our developments as a business. We are promoting high energy efficient appliances and water reducing appliances within all of our developments. It's designed to have a renewable embedded energy network provider on board. It's designed to have 2.5 kilowatt solar panels per townhome. It's designed around the 86% walkability score that we have and the 67% transit score that we have. 2 bicycles per dwelling, a reduction in car parking, and a condition that we support given to us from the planners, which was a car share space, something we're happy to comply with. We've increased the deep tree planting from 15 to 28%. We remove these internal roads and urban heat island effect through the use of our 2,142 square metres. We ask councillors to consider, along with the 73 objectives, the policy and strategy that's driving Darebin. We have complied with the design policies, and we are working towards the climate emergency requirements of a reduction of car parking. State government policy seeks to promote urban consolidation, which is heavily dependent on housing developments, particularly infill locations, such as this location. The proposal meets the strategy under the planning policy framework. The development is intensification of the existing urban area, but it successfully meets most of the standards applicable under Clause 55 of the scheme. We have to date transformed petrol stations, bandage pole wrapping sites to 66 and 69 apartments respectively. And we're the first developer. Oh, sorry. And we're the first developer to have completed a Nightingale project in Brunswick East. We'd like your support to change 6,112 square metres of concrete and 10-foot brick walls into 49 homes. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And apologies, we need to stick to our timeframes. Thank you. If I can now invite one of the objectors, Robert Atanasovsky. Atanasovsky, I think is. Yep, is that right? Yep. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, good. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Hi, my name's Robert. I've been a resident with Darebin for the last 13 years. I love living in this area, especially, it's a community that prides itself on looking after its residents and the inclusivity of this community. I'm here tonight representing several residents in the area that have submitted these objections and are impacted by this development. We're by no means opposed to developing the site, but we're here tonight to urge you as councillors to reject the proposal in its current form. Town planning supports the issue of issuing a planning application despite some 73 objections, as we've heard, and 1 petition received. Our concerns have been well documented. They range from, but not limited to, the density of the layout of the development exceeding beyond other developments within similar residential areas, the significant car parking reduction in spaces from the required amount that's required from such a development, as we know, the amenity concerns overshadowing the character and non-compliant basement ramp, with a lack of sightlines contributing to safety issues at grade. Now, following the consultation process, it seems that none of our concerns have actually been addressed, but rather just accepted. So despite our best efforts to raise them with both the developer and council's planning department, what has been most disappointing is that we were given only 2 weeks advertising period to respond, and even with a short time frame, the residents still responded with a positive attitude, a willingness to engage with council and the developer, and even raised several proposed suggestions in the consultation meeting. However, since then, there have been no amendments made to these plans, and there has been no two-way dialogue. So as residents, we feel disappointed, despondent, and frustrated by the lack of care shown to our community through this planning process. Additionally, as noted, we said that, and we've just heard that most of the amendments to the planning scheme have been met, but again, there are several deviations that have been noted in the proposed report. So in particular to setbacks, overshadowing, overlooking character, passive surveillance, and all these add up to in terms of total impact to us as residents. Not only to mention the safety of basement access, how is that being addressed? Evidence showing that the non-compliant ramp at street level, where we have high pedestrian traffic, and whether this is the best design option for such a site. I believe the tandem parking is probably unsatisfactory, as it obviously requires to remove the compulsory 6 cubic metre storage area, but I still think that's a significant reduction. There's no explanation as to how emergency services vehicles will enter in this ground floor area and how access will be provided, and there's no acknowledgement in the report that this design discriminates against people with disability and mobility issues. And finally, the argument that the proposed development is better than what was there before sets an incredibly low bar for this and future developments, and is frankly insulting to our community. Therefore, we're appealing to the councillors, you as our representatives for our community, to show your support for us and to reject this planning application. Not to put an absolute stop to developing this site, let me be clear, but it's to recognise that this development in its current form is inappropriate for the area and fails to mitigate the impacts on its residents. No, thank you.
Thank you.
That's about it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, apologies, we do need to stick to our times. Thank you to both our applicant and our objector this evening. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Greco.
I have an alternate motion.
You do. Thank you, Councillor Greco. If I can ask Councillor Greco's motion to be listed on screen. Councillor Reddy, you're indicating that you're seconding that. Is that right? Thank you. I'll just ask you, Councillor Greco, just to confirm that the wording is as you submitted once it is on screen.
Yes, it does.
It is, and I think, is there any text over page, or that's the whole thing? That's the whole thing? Yep. Great. Councillor Rennie, you're confirming you're seconding that. Thank you so much. Councillor Greco, if you'd like to speak to the motion.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the applicant and also the objectors for making a submission here tonight. Look, I think leading off the question that I asked our officers, the essential issue here is about neighbourhood character, together with the not meeting the car parking provisions. Look, I've heard from the applicant, and I heard a lot of goodwill there in terms of trying to achieve the climate emergency objectives, but that does not go far enough, in my view, in the sense that whilst it's admirable to try and achieve those types of objectives, but also something has to also be given back to the immediate community. Achieving those objectives at the cost of community, from my perspective, doesn't really cut it. Also, I'd just like to point out that from the objector's perspective, I'm actually disappointed to see that there's been a lack of engagement. I thought that given the nature of the project that's been put forward, and given what we heard from the developer, that there would have been a greater sense of engagement and a greater opportunity to accommodate some of the requirements. The alternate motion spells out the areas of, in my view, that why this particular application should be rejected. And again, I go back to the central issue of neighbourhood character. I just make this point. I grew up around that area, so I know that area. I know the meat factory. It's an old working class area, and the stench of the meat factory was atrocious. And so I really agree that there should be development in the area, but it's a very sensitive area in terms of the heritage houses that are nearby, and the people that live in the area have got are very proud of the area that they live in, and it's a highly residential area. So there should be a greater accommodation being made in terms of any future major development in that space that actually blends in well with the existing neighbourhood. And so on that basis, I think this application should be rejected. There should be more communication, and it's just my humble advice, between the developer and the goodwill of the residents in trying to arrive at an outcome that both achieves climate change objectives, but also gives back to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Rennie is the second. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. I'm speaking against granting a planning permit for this development with some reluctance, and that's because I actually think there's a lot to like in this proposal, and in particular I think it will provide or proposes 49 high quality homes which would be really valued, I've no doubt, by the people who might move into them. There is one area alone which concerns me, and that is the site coverage of 63%. We have a standard which is 60%, and I hold that pretty sacred, I'd have to say, because once we bend that standard, then there's kind of no going back. I would support this development if it met the 60%. I like the fact that there is communal open space. I can see the thought that's gone into the way in which we'll present to the street. I'm highly familiar with the location and ride my bicycle past it almost daily on my way to work. We need these sort of homes in the area. We often say that we want more housing diversity. It's not often that we get 4-bedroom homes coming to us. They're of a high quality, and I particularly like the communal open space. I'm not actually concerned about the car parking, and that is because anyone who looks at the basement car park will see that there is scope for 41 of these dwellings to actually have a second car park. So whilst they are not immediately present, if a buyer comes to the developer and says, I'd like to buy a townhouse, but I want 2 car parks, that can actually be incorporated immediately. And for those of us who have large houses and only 1 car, we may well understand that we would prefer to have storage or a table tennis table or any number of things rather than a second car park. And so I think it's important to recognise that this is one of the cleverest presentations of car parking I've ever seen, in that it will actually provide a choice to future residents to have 1 or 2 car parks, with a preference for 1, because that's actually what we'd like to see, which is less cars.
Councillor Rennie,
Thank
that's
you.
time. Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Any other councillors who might like to speak to this motion? Councillor Demetriadis.
Thank you. I know this is one of the biggest objections that I've been in a planning meeting for. I'm only one of the new councillors, and it also had a petition along with it. The proposal, I'm in support of the alternative motion. I won't be supporting the current planning for a number of reasons. For instance, I know one of the issues were raised was disability access. There wasn't none at the whole site. There was also the issue of privacy with the school, which I think is being addressed, but things like screening vegetation can take years to have effect. So I think we need to be aware of that there still could be in the interim a lot of issues with privacy in the school. So we need to make sure that gets addressed accordingly. Also, I think more open space would be great for this development, because it's also situated in a residential zone with heritage overlay to the east and south sides of the site. Yet it seems that the neighbourhood character of this particular development may not fit with the current heritage overlays in the area. Now, the big thing that really concerns me is the car parking, and that's because 48 car parking spaces were wanting to be removed, and that would only leave 2 visitor permits with only 1 electric vehicle charging space. Yet the solution to traffic congestion, when I asked the question from council, was that we would put in restrictions for all other residents along the streets if there ever was to be traffic congestion because of the development. And therefore, as we've seen in other areas of the municipality, we're fining residents outside their houses for allowing developments such as these with minimal parking to be allowed in our municipality. I don't agree that cars should be removed from the municipality. I don't think it's the way to go. And I think that with the introduction of electric vehicles, we really need to consider our position on removing cars from this municipality.
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Councillor Williams, you'd like to speak to the motion?
Council received over 70 objections. If the residents thought that this was an appropriate development, we certainly wouldn't be here this evening. Notwithstanding the residents' objections, I understand that the subject land is ready for redevelopment. In this case, the opportunity exists for the site as a multi-storey apartment building that contributes positively to the character and neighbourhood and respects the amenity of neighbours. New developments must fit and livable to those living in it and around it. A development in this location must be in sympathy with the surroundings, both in respect of the size and the areas of the amenity. This allows for future developments that complements one another and are managed in a whole of the neighbourhood manner. The proposed development in this current form is unreasonable. Not only will it have an adverse impact on the amenity, but it will have a detrimental to the amenity of the area. The proposed site coverage is 63%, exceeds the clause 55.03-3 standard, and does not meet the objective to respect the neighbourhood character of the area. Unreasonable overlooking into the adjoining and directly facing residential properties will create a loss of privacy for the surrounding residents and to the open space area to the West Gus Primary School. The application fails to provide any disability access. We are currently an ageing population and therefore should be constructing and supporting access and mobility. If this development proceeds, it will undoubtedly fuel the problem and place further strains on car parking provisions have not been made for the apartment residents, along with visitors and car parking availability. The lack of supply and shortfall of car parking spaces on the site will no doubt only heighten and exacerbate the current shortage of car parking spaces for private residents, current employees and from the local school, and carers who are doing school drop-off and
That's
pickups
time,
during the
Councillor
time
Williams.
of will overflow and impact into the neighbouring streets.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I'll be voting against this motion. I think that when I look at planning applications, I often think about whether I would like to live in the development, and I think we do see an application here where I absolutely would like to live. And I lived without a car in Darwin for a very long time, and I think it's a reasonable reduction in car parking with the option to create 2 parking spaces if you need to. So absolutely accept that 63% site coverage does exceed what we see commonly, but I think this is an application worth supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence, I think you'll be the last one, actually.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor McCarthy and Chair. Look, I fully support the alternate motion put up by Councillor Greco and welcome him on it. These are important standards we have in Clause 55 and Clause 50. All of those provisions are important. They're standards. They're not options to opt in or out of. And when you go to VCAT and you have this type of argument, you not only win. I found on Darebin Boulevard, the VCAT Commissioner tripled the amount of defects I'd identified and overturned a council decision. So I think I commend Councillor Greco for bringing up our standards. As I've mentioned before, and I continue to mention, we requested 36% protection from Matthew Guy. We got 13% protection. Our only quality control, because our schemes are against us, they're a Liberal scheme, is applying the standards when we have them. And yes, when we get rid of ugly factories that my family worked in, we don't want to duplicate a low quality outcome. We should use imaginations. This is a high premium area. And if our standards can't be met here, where there is a very ready market for quality, I don't know where they'll be met.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I believe all councillors have spoken now to this item, in which case I will put the item to... there has been a speaker against, so Councillor Greco, I think you've got the right of reply if you wish to exercise it.
Yes, look, I'll just re-emphasise a couple of points. Obviously, the car parking issue is a huge issue, and I think that seriously needs to be taken into consideration, which goes back to my point that I was mentioning earlier. What is the community benefit or the consequences of this development on the rest of the community, as Councillor Dimitriadis said. The site coverage is a big factor, and it's been mentioned by councillors, and I think that standard needs to be accepted. And just to round this off, I think on the note that Councillor Lawrence said is this area is a fairly sensitive area. It's a neighbourhood area. There is a heritage overlay very adjacent to this area. So any development that we do consider for this area, as a minimum, should meet our standards and our objectives, and there should not be any compromise on that. What's been proposed will be something that will be there at least for 1 or 2 generations, and I think that we need to be careful in what we approve in large areas like that, because they will have an impact on the area per se. We're not talking about one house of one block or a couple of dwellings on one block, so it will have a profound effect. So that's why we need to be very considered in our view, and that's why I believe that voting for this motion of rejection, getting the developer to genuinely speak and engage with the residents, I believe that an outcome can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. So, councillors, we've heard from you all. We've also heard the right of reply. So I'll put the motion. Those in favour of the alternative motion listed there on screen. Okay, that's Councillor Demetriadis, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Rennie, Councillor Williams and myself, Councillor McCarthy. Those against? Councillor Newton. So I'll declare the motion carried. Thank you, councillors. And just for the benefit of councillors and the gallery, the Planning Committee has decided to not support the application at the upcoming tribunal hearings. The applicant, objectors, the tribunal and all parties to the hearings will be notified of council's position in writing. An objector can request to be joined as a party to the appeal if they have not already. Information about how to do this is available on the VCAT website. Thank you everyone who joined us for this item. We will now move to the next item on our agenda. Councillors. Councillors, item 5.3 relates to Amendment C186 DARE-Open Space Levy. So I'll invite our officers up to present to the committee in relation to this item. And welcome back, Councillor Hannan, as well. Just to let you know, we have now moved to item 5.3, which is the open space levy item. And I've just welcome our officers to the meeting, give them a chance to set themselves up, and then I'll invite them when they're ready to provide a brief overview on this item. Welcome, officers.
Thank you, councillors. This item concerns Amendment C186 to the Darebin Planning Scheme, which proposes to modify Clause 5301 to require all subdivisions to pay a 10% open space levy. This will fund an expansion in the quantity and quality of open space and recreational assets. The amendment was first publicly exhibited in December 2019, following which Council resolved to refer submissions to an independent panel. In response to the recommendations of a different panel for a similar amendment by the City of Monash, Darebin City Council resolved to undertake further work before proceeding with the panel at that stage. Consequently, Darebin City Council placed a revised Amendment C186 on a second round of public exhibition between the 30th of September and the 31st of October last year. A total of 25 submissions were received through the re-exhibition process, including one late submission. Of these, 2 supported the amendment, 1 was neutral and 22 objected. Should Council wish to continue with Amendment C186, the next step is for Council to consider these additional submissions and refer all submissions to an independent planning panel. Since the close of submissions in November 2021, Council staff have been considering and responding to submissions, meeting with some submitters to explore the issues raised and preparing for a panel hearing. However, the recent negative experiences of other councils at panels, particularly the City of Yarra, which proposed a similar 10.1% open space levy, have significantly undermined the likelihood of success of Darebin Amendment C186. Proceeding with C186 in its current form would be costly to Council and carries a high risk of an unfavourable result at panel. The lack of an appropriate accepted statewide methodology poses further risks to the amendment, and this as it results in an ambiguity in the approval systems and variations between councils in the way they justify and calculate a levy. Consequently, it is recommended that Council not proceed with C186 in its current form. It is instead recommended that Council implement a 2-step strategy to progressively increase the open space rate and address the strategic risks that have arisen since 2019 as outlined within the report. Further, it is recommended that Council write to the Minister for Planning outlining the difficulties faced by Darebin and other councils in preparing an open space amendment and the lack of any meaningful guidance from panels or the state as to the methodology for establishing an open space levy and the impact this has on councils in regards to cost and infrastructure planning.
Thank you for the presentation. Councillors, do you have any questions of our officers that are here this evening? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just had a question. Could we just get some indication on what would be the cost of if council was to pursue our amendment application? What will be the additional cost that we would need to incur in relation to legal fees and consultants' fees, etc.?
Thank you for the question. The cost would be substantial. As an estimate...
Could you speak closer to the phone? Sorry.
The cost would be substantial. As the proponent, council would need to cover the costs of the panel, in addition to the costs associated with consultants and an extensive legal team. This is quite a complex amendment, and it would be quite an intensive legal team. The costs are in the order of, we estimate, to 170 to 200,000.
200?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Do any other councillors have questions? Councillor Demetriadis.
Thank you, Chair. And if we were to go down that process that would cost 200,000, what are the chances of success?
Thank you for the question. The chances of success are very low. Advice from our legal team, exceptionally low. The advice from our legal team and our consultant team, on the basis of recent decisions that other councils have experienced at their panel, again, the City of Yarra have proposed the almost exact same rate. They had a very well-prepared amendment and it has failed. And again, we believe that the chance of success is exceptionally low.
Thank you. Any other councillors have any questions in relation to this? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, thank you for the information. I've just got a question regarding councils that have failed in similar scale of levy you mentioned. How would you compare City of Yarra's submission to the City of Monish's, which I understand the City of Monash was also ambitious and had detailed improvement plans connected to it? Was the City of Yarra similar to the quality of Monash's?
In fact, I actually, thank you for the question. I believe that the City of Yarra proposal, and again, I haven't gone through both submissions in detail, but the City of Yarra submission and their amendment proposal was exceptionally detailed. They had a very well prepared legal team. They had a methodology that had been accepted at other municipalities and a group of consultants that had had a degree of success. So I think I would speculate that they, but particularly from the outside, we have been surprised that their amendment has not proceeded.
Final call, councillors. Any questions in relation to this before we move to our submitters? If there are no further questions, councillors, I'll invite our submitters. We have two submitters this evening, councillors, in relation to this item. Each submitter will get 2 minutes in relation to their submission and in relation to this item. The first I'll call is David Taylor. Welcome, David. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I start by suggesting there might be some who feel I come here to say, I told you so. That would not only be ungracious, it's also inaccurate. I and all other members of the Darebin Nature Trust who served on that body prior to our 2021 sacking were supporters of attempts to secure a 10% levy because we knew the fundamental truth is that Darebin has very poor quality open space. However, our support was not without qualification. We knew that the increase to 10% was a big ask. We were continually concerned about whether there was a sufficient case being made. From the outset in 2018, we were constructively critical about the new open space strategy, which we were told was foundational to the levy increase. Current failings of the levy process trace back to failings with breathing space. It was wishful thinking, not strategy. Later, as preparation of material for the planning panel proceeded, our reservations continued. While we can now perhaps admit that the attempt to secure the increased levy was, in the words of Sir Humphrey, a courageous initiative, we should not gloss over what such a description really implies. Words such as excessively ambitious, ill-advised and poorly thought through come to mind. The key reason such descriptions are appropriate is that possibly about $1 million or more, has now been wasted on this 4-year frolic. However, looking forward, there is a key issue that needs to be addressed. Darebin's poor quality open space is undoubtedly a product of many decades of mismanagement. The key message that needs to be absorbed is that poor quality open space is something that Darebin needs to own unreservedly and therefore commit to paying for. Leadership must be shown. However, while ever the cultural practice of Darebin is to endlessly protect the realm, never admit shortcomings and always paper over problems with excuses, this major issue is unlikely to be addressed. Darebin, this is your wake-up call for open space. I urge you to seize this opportunity born of failure by thinking long and hard about lessons that can be learnt from likely abandonment of this amendment.
Thanks, David. Our next speaker, now next submitter is Sam Kodsky. Sam, you also have 2 minutes.
Yeah, hi, how you going? I've actually submitted what I wanted to say. I was just say it again to you. It's basically, with the open space, it's going to cost probably, $100,000 on average on a block. And I think the people are going to probably feel it the most are the smaller developers, the 3, 2 and 4 unit sites. I think the biggest problem is the major developers who have caused a lot of issues with waivers of car spaces, balconies. I think they should be the ones paying for this issue by putting a fee of $10,000 per waiver. I think also with balconies, open spaces, they should also pay a waiver on that. I think the biggest problem are the big high-rises that are going up on High Street all the way to Northcote. I think they've caused the biggest problem in open space in Darebin. Not so much the smaller sites, 2, 3, 4 sites. So I think what we're doing there, we're just going to push prices up on townhouses because they meet the 40 square metres and they meet the car spaces when you go into planning. They're the requirements and they're being met. By doing this, it's going to cost an average of $100,000 to $120,000 a site, which is going to be passed on to most likely first-home buyers who buy the townhouses. I think it should be passed back on the big developers. So, yeah, I think that's all I need to say now. The rest of it is on my submission. Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. Okay, thank you to both of our submitters for their submissions this evening. Councillors, do we have a motion? Councillor Greco. Which motion? You're moving the officer's recommendation? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hannan. So moved by Councillor Greco, seconded by Councillor Hannan. That's the officer's recommendation as listed on the screen. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. It's really a hard act to follow in relation to what our submitters have put forward to us tonight. Just as background, when this was originally discussed in Council, the strategy going forward, I had some grave reservations in relation to the strategy and the methodology that we were adopting. At the time, we were getting information from the Darebin Nature Trust also expressing reservations, grave reservations in relation to the methodology that Council was embarking on in trying to justify a 10% open space levy. The earlier reports that we had identified that we had an 18% open space gap in our city. And also, as has been mentioned by the submitter, that it's not about the quantity of open space, but the quality of open space that we have. And I'll make a particular point here in relation to what happens north of Bell Street in terms of the open space and the quality of open space north of Bell Street. Some of that open space there, you can just refer to as a paddock. It's not even a park compared to some of the open space and the quality of the open space in the southern end of our city. But just staying on topic here, I think we need to step back. We need to acknowledge that the strategy that we have pursued has not delivered us an outcome. And we have to be open and frank about that, because when we make errors, it takes courage to say that we pursued something that was not the right way about it. It's not us just walking away from something like this. Monash Council, Yarra Council, they've tried to see whether they could pursue a similar strategy, and they have been rejected and knocked back. So it'll be a folly for us to spend another $200,000 in relation to pursuing this claim to see what we could arrive out of it. So I think that the officer's advice is good advice this time about stepping back and coming back to this issue in a much more comprehensive and articulated manner, so that we can actually purposely argue for how to achieve a sustainable open space levy into the future. And that's, I believe, that the course of action that we need to take. $200,000 is a lot of money. I recently was speaking to some people from Diverse, and food relief in our city is a growing concern. $200,000 in food relief in our city could go a long way in putting food on people's tables.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Hannan, you're the seconder of the motion. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I'd like to support this motion, although I think for different reasons to Councillor Greco. I'd just like to come back to the reason that this work is done, and it's the pressure that not just Darebin but all metropolitan, especially metropolitan councils are facing, which is the urgent need for more open space. With an increasing population, there is an urgent need for many reasons to improve open space, and Darebin has done extensive work to make the case for a significant increase in land, and that it's appropriate for developers to contribute to this in the order of 10% of the value of subdivided properties. And I'd just like to remind councils, not just once but twice, that it was actually confirmed through detailed work done as the implementing the breathing space report. So I fully support this evidence-based position. However, given the lack of state government guidance in this area, we can only go by the decisions the previous planning panels have made in relation to other councils' applications. And based on this, our expert advice is that Darebin's proposal is unlikely to succeed in its current form. There is a provision to put in place a hopefully fairly straightforward application for a 5% levy and start generating revenue from this towards the provision of open space, because every year we delay this leads to a loss of revenue for Darebin. So though I stand by the case for a much higher levy, I believe the best course at this time is to progress towards a 5% levy in the interim, to propose, if we're going to spend any money on this, it would be propose the state government set clearer guidelines and substantial contributions
Councillor Hannan.
and develop a longer-term approach in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. With a great deal of reluctance, I'm going to be voting against this, and a significant amount of ambivalence. I think every councillor around this table, well, I'm certain every councillor around this table wants to see the open space levy in Darebin increase. That's in the interests of our community and of the quality of open space that's available to them. But I believe strongly that you should finish what you start, and we've started on a process, and I think there's an alternative course of action available, which is to refer the submissions to the panel and for Darebin Council to provide a thoughtful response to those submissions and make significant concessions in front of the panel. However, I hear advice that may not be successful. I'm still in favour of further exploration of that option. And, you know, fairly disappointed, as is everyone, that we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve, which was a more significant open space levy. I'd like to thank the staff who have worked pretty tirelessly over the last 5 years to try and achieve this open space levy, and I sort of commend the advocacy component that is in this motion, because it seems to me that we're facing shifting goalposts and very uncertain space in terms of what actually councils have to do to cater for the future open space needs of their communities.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? Councillor Demetriadis.
Thank you, Chair. Now, this is another classic example of what we set out to achieve but didn't do it, as one of the councillors has said. It's another unrealistic project that some councillors wanted to pursue for their own political agendas. And it's really frustrating that we spend a lot of money, time and effort to be doing this when we've got advisory committees such as the Darebin Nature Trust, previous Darebin Nature... I'm sorry, are you interjecting my speech?
So I'm just asking you, Councillor Demetriadis, if you maybe can desist from referring to other councillors and maybe speak to the item if you can. Thanks.
Thank you. Back to what I was saying, some of these unrealistic projects that have been set by certain councillors just to pursue their own political agendas has cost us a lot of money and a lot of time. We had expert advice from the previous Darebin Nature Trust, who have also put in submissions today about the reservations they had, and stating that it's costed us over $1 million or more wasted on this particular issues. We say we have an urgent need for open space. Well, then don't approve inappropriate developments. It's actually that simple. Make sure that we are considerate and sticking to our standards when we do approve developments. Spending an additional amount of money for something that's of very little chance of success, about just to finish what we started, is actually not the way we should be making decisions. We really need to rethink how this council operates.
Thank you, Councillor Demetriadis. Would any other councillors like to speak to the motion? Councillor Newton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will be supporting this officer recommendation. This is something that we've been working on for a long time. It's something where we know very clearly from the open space strategy that there are gaps in people having open space 500 metres from their home, and we know that a levy would really make a huge difference to our ability to purchase more and have more quality open space. But unfortunately, it does seem like things have shifted, and that we have seen a number of councils have their 10% or 10.1% knockback. So we do need to take a different direction. Our office has been very clear on that. And you know, I just really hope that in future we can get more clarity from state government about what they really require from us in this space. And I think that, you know, this is something that's so important. We've been through 2 years of lockdown. Open space is so incredible and so important to mental health and wellbeing. And, you know, hopefully getting 5% will help that. But I hope that we can continue on and find a way to really find benefit for our community through this process.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Would any other councillors like to speak to this item? Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Chair, Deputy Mayor McCarthy. Yes, look, I think, you know, there's a number of things people have debated here, and which are separate but interconnected. Universal quality open space should be a plan that we develop. We should front up to the costs. I didn't like a report that edited out nearly 200 hectares of open space in it. I thought that was easily seen through. So we need to have evidence-based reports as well. I come from a ward with over 200 hectares of open space. We have a $1.5 million budget to look after a regional park. That's not enough. To think that we've lost 4 years of $5 million by being lured into a pot of gold mentality is going to have intergenerational impact. $1 million would also clean up, hopefully, Clements Reserve that remains contaminated with lead and not completed and not actually purchased either in terms of Vic roads. So when the Nature Trust raised the issue of universal standards, I think that's the homework we actually have to go back and start with and front up to what 100 years of industrialisation did to this city, including lead poisoning and other things in the Edwards Lake. So it's a big thing. I'm not letting the state government or local government Victoria or anyone off the hook on this. We take up the fight for open space very seriously in Darebin. Not all sectors of local government think open space is a core council activity. I can tell you it's
Councillor
a very
Lawrence,
important
that's time.
activity. So let's go with a realistic plan, get some money back in the system.
Lawrence. Thank you. Councillors, I think we've heard from all councillors except for Councillor Williams, is that right? Not every councillor has to speak to every item, I'll just remind you all. But councillors, are there any further speakers? If not, we have the motion there on screen. Councillor Greco, you have the right of reply as the mover because there was a speaker against. So would you like to exercise the right of reply?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to just make a few points in relation to what's been said against this motion. Councillors, I think it's really financially irresponsible to say let's just follow through and you know just pull out $200,000 and let's just have a crack at something like this. That is just clearly financially irresponsible. Like I mentioned before, there are many groups in our community that are having difficulty putting food on their table. And we're told about this by our neighbourhood houses. And for us to consider just to, you know, flip over $200,000 to a bunch of consultants who are going to pursue an ideological agenda, it just doesn't cut it for me. It makes me angry. I want to acknowledge and respect the work that our officers have done in this space and the reports that they have given us. And there's no reflection on our officers. I've got to make that point clear. To me, it's a reflection of pursuing an ideological agenda by consultants in this space and in relation to then luring councils to put in a claim of this nature. The strategy was deficient from the outset. Other councils were told about that the strategy is deficient. 2 councils were told about that. And we kept going. We tried to keep going in this thing. We need an open space strategy, and I just want to pick up on what one of the submitters said. We need to make big developers pay for open space. We see this in Preston Market, where they're trying to max out the area there and buy their way through in relation to open space. We need a strategy that makes big developers pay for open space.
That's time. Thank you, Councillor Greco. We've heard from councillors and we've also heard from the mover in a right of reply. So councillors, I'll call those in favour of the motion as listed on screen. That's Councillor Dimitriadis, Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Greco, Councillor Hannan, Councillor Newton, Councillor Williams and myself, Councillor McCarthy. Those against, Councillor Rennie. I declare the motion carried. Thank you, councillors. So just in relation to that item, obviously it's not a planning permit, it is a matter in relation to a planning scheme amendment. I'll thank our officers for their contribution as well this evening. Bear with me just a moment, councillors. Thank you, and thank you also to our submitters. Councillors, we now are at item 6, other business. So we have the general planning information scheduled VCAT applications. Do I have a mover of the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Seconded by Councillor Williams. Unless there's any debate, we'll go those in favour. Yep, that's passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 7, consideration of reports considered confidential. There being no confidential business to consider this evening, we'll move on to the next item, which of course is the close of meeting. Councillors, as there is no other business to consider this evening, I'd like to declare the Planning Committee meeting closed at 7:56 p.m. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you also to those of us that have joined us online. Thank you. Thank you to our officers.